Testing, testing.
3 or 4. I missed the.
Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Testing.
It's not very loud. Is there a speaker? Have you got two out front or one? Turn one in, one out. That was dinner last night.
Really tiny space and then like five.
Introducing, where have we got our man of the moment? Mr. Greg Pankhurst. He barely needs an introduction, but just bear with me a moment. So, Greg, as we know, has a very deep experience in the live export sector. Actually, almost 30 years owning and operating and consulting to feedlots throughout Southeast Asia. It really all began in 1998. He's had very successful and long JV partnerships up in Indonesia, and most of you would know Diki Adawaso, who is also present with us this afternoon. Actually, I'll just take a moment to welcome and acknowledge our Indonesian visitors who's sitting out on the foyer there. So very warm welcome to you as all. So back to Greg. Greg continues to be a consultant for a number of Southeast Asian operations, as well as running his own operation here in Queensland. So welcome, Greg, and thanks for joining us. Okay. I'd now like to introduce Will Evans. So there's nothing written about Will Evans, so that gives me license to say whatever I like, but I'd really like to a warm welcome to Will, a fellow Territorian, the current CEO of the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association, doing a cracking job, speechwriter extraordinaire, and all-round good guy. Formerly the CEO of Live Exporters Association, so knows this industry very well, and also deeply involved in policy at the former Cattle Council. So welcome, Will. I'd now like to introduce Ryan Olive. So we've just come from the Graham Acton program lunch, and Ryan's a former member of that wonderful program. So it's great to see the program, you know, paying dividend and going on and producing for our industry. So, Ryan is a third-generation Brahman breeder, has recently grown his family business to incorporate a registered premise. So well done. That's no easy task, as we know. This is to service live export through Port Alma. Ryan brings a wealth of knowledge as a Central Queensland cattle producer, a live export buyer, and sits on the QLEA committee. Welcome, Ryan. So I think I'd like to start big if I can. It's a really interesting time. Certainly geopolitically, we're hearing a lot. There's a lot of international chatter going on in the region that we operate in and in the markets that are very important to us. Also domestically, in a regulatory sense, in a political sense, and the environment that we're operating in is a really interesting one. So I think it would be a really great thing to start the discussion this afternoon to talk about how our very experienced panellists see the industry shaping up over the next 12 months. What are the opportunities that you see presenting itself for industry, but also what are the risks? So I might start with you, Will.
Thank you, Tracy. You guys hear that okay? Yep, good, right. I mean, I think if I could pick one thing I'd like to see happen in the live export space in the next 12 months is that we settle the Brett cattle class action. Of course, that's something that remains an ongoing challenge for us, and you really can't talk... Righto, we're going. How's that? Is that better? Thank you. Look, if there's one thing I'd like to see happen in the next 12 months in the live export industry or in the live export space is that we settle the Brett cattle class action after more than 14 years. And for those of you who missed out earlier in the week, I thought Tracy did an incredibly courageous thing. It seems unfortunate in some ways that you can't talk about live export without talking about politics. So certainly from my perspective in the lens of the NTCA, what we're hoping for in the next 12 months is that we're able to operate unimpeded by any sort of government regulation or government reform, and that we can start to see a progressive and more sympathetic approach to the way in which we're doing business and try to support us supplying 1 million head of cattle a year overseas all around the world. It's a critical trade. In terms of what's coming up in the commercial space, I'll very much leave that to these two gentlemen here. They know far more about it than I do. But from a regulatory perspective, certainly what we need to be focusing on is ensuring that good performance is rewarded by good regulation and that we're supporting an industry that's critical to Northern Australia.
Thanks, Will. Actually, it's pertinent that you mentioned the regulatory space. It's certainly been very topical of late, and I don't think we could have a conversation, albeit in the beef capital of Australia, to have a live export discussion and not talk about what's happening in the regulatory space in regards to sheep live export in WA. So it might be a little early in the discussion, but I saw John Cunnington here earlier from Weiler. Yeah, welcome. As Chair of Western Australian Live Exporters, do you mind, I might just throw to you, and I'm really keen just to get a couple of words from you as to the impact this pending closure, I guess, of the live export of the sheep trade from WA is having on your people and your community.
Thanks, Tracy. From my perspective, in the West Coast, it's all about confidence. Even though the ban and the timeline hasn't been put in place yet, we've seen farmers just lose absolute confidence in the sheep trade going forward. But what it's realistically going to do is decimate the sheep flock in Western Australia. We're already seeing rams not be put in over ewes, and this can have ramifications for the next few years. But the real telling point is the infrastructure. If that starts to go, we'll never get it back, and the flock will never come back. And I mean, WA produces huge amounts of wool for the country, also the sheep meat. And this will likely impede the processes if the sheep flock gets decimated as well. So it all starts with confidence, and even though the phase out hasn't happened, the threat of it is the real threat. And I think at the end of the day, is the line in the sand for agriculture, that if they do impose this phase out, every part of agriculture is next.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think I might just hand to Ryan now. There's some really important messages in there. As someone that's, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm interested in your perspective. As someone that's deeply involved in buying cattle, I mentioned in your bio that your family operated a registered premise. If there were to be a phase out of live export, what impact would it have on your community, your industry, and yourself as a young up-and-coming leader in our industry?
Thanks, Tracy. I think that's actually a very valid question, because it wouldn't just affect me. I think it's going to affect everyone in this room, whether you believe it or not. It's going to be like the magnitude of flow-on effect from the northern parts of Australia. If all those cattle have to flow back, like I'm sure everyone here is understanding or has an understanding of the economics behind it, and as supply and demand shifts heavily to the supply side, then we'll definitely see. Well, I believe we'll definitely see the price come screaming back. And you know, we've seen it once before in 2011, and there's no reason why that it wouldn't happen again if the trade is to be shut down.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think we're going to move on to some positives really quickly and talk about resilience and the things that industry is working really hard on. But I started off asking a question about opportunities and risks for the coming 12 months. So, you know, I think let's put the ban discussion behind us. We've really run that to ground, and I'd like to hand to you now, Greg. I'm interested to hear your perspective as a businessman and very experienced, very deep experience in both Indonesia and in Australia.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm sometimes referred to as Pessimist Pankhurst. Roz will probably vouch for that sometimes. But look, I'm going to put my optimistic hat on today, and I have great optimism for the trade. The last few years have been difficult. We've had it's been great for the Australian producer because there's been plenty of money out there to pay for cattle. The jobs eased back, and that's put my Indonesian hat on now. It's good for the Indonesian side because they're now making that constant return that they have made. So I've got great optimism about the trade at the moment. Indonesia is healthy again. We've got a new government coming into town. The economy is improving. The feedlots are ready to go. The prices work for them at the moment. So I've got a lot of optimism for Indonesia. And Vietnam is very much the same. We're seeing a lot of demand come out of Vietnam again as well. And their market is improving, their consumption is increased. China is also on the increase again, and we're seeing that by the large amounts of beef that they're taking. So look, as far as I'm concerned, it's not let's get out the firecrackers and champagne, but I see a lot more optimism on the horizon than pessimism Pankhurst would normally say. But at the end of the day, we still have a few challenges up there, especially Indonesia, still have those disease challenges that we really need to consider. Lumpy skin, foot and mouth disease are still there, still very real, still there, consistent. And we should never let those leave our mind, because they're there on our borders. I know I have talked a lot about it, and we've kept them at bay to date. But we still need to engage with the Indonesians especially and assist them through these difficult times.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And just on that, I think one of the things that we understand very well is the importance of relationships and you know, firm sort of friendships over the good times and the bad. I'd like to welcome Ollie here from Wyland, the Young Livestock Exporters Network. We've also, some of you might be tuned into the success of the Forum AWO that's been going on of late. It's been very active on social media. Will, I'm going to throw to you now. The NTCA has been running a really successful program. There's some part of the alumni present with us today. It's really an example, I think, of the success of that program is us now, AAM as a business. We're now employing people that went through that NTCA alumni Indonesian exchange program many years ago through Northern Australia. So it's really an amazing I guess, group of individuals that we've got very deep connections with. I'm not sure, it might be a little controversial to raise this now, but bugger it, I'm going to go with it anyway. I'm not sure that the program's got funding. We know how important it is. What are we doing to ensure that we're working really hard on our relationships and keeping those bonds and connections? Do we need to work harder in that space?
That's a terrifically crafted question, Tracy. Thank you. Look, there's a plethora of youth programs in agriculture, and they all have varying levels of success and varying levels of support. I'm very proud to say the Future NTCA program has been very successful over the years. We actually have board members today who came through the first iteration of the Future NTCA program, and these are the things where you invest in a program that ultimately gives back. And my enormous amount of optimism is that the people who've gone through the program today will be sitting on boards for the beef industry and the beef businesses in this room in the not too distant future. Future NTCA is I'm very happy to say, a well-funded program. It's a program run purely by the NTCA. The Young Livestock Exporter Network, on the other hand, is chasing sponsors, and Ollie's asked me to mention that to you all here. Ollie's here. Please do have a yarn to him after this. Wyland's a terrific organisation, but it's young and it needs as much support as possible. The program that we're really struggling with at the moment is a funny one. It's our exchange program that we've had with Indonesia. In the wake of 2011, the government committed to a red meat and cattle partnership with Indonesia and provided substantial funding for a large amount of projects all across Indonesia, all across Northern Australia. And one of the projects that are funded was our exchange program that we've had with Indonesia. Now, we've been running this for almost, 10 years now, Tracy, I think. It'll be just over 10 years. We've had more than 200 participants in the program. We bring Indonesian university students from 11 different universities across Indonesia to the Northern Territory and put them on cattle stations, and they gain the experience and the insight that our stations are able to offer. We have an enormous alumni network now in Indonesia. It is a program that has contributed enormous value to Northern Australia and the industries that we all work in. And as of today, I'm sitting here and I'm telling you that the government is not going to fund it into the future. They're not going to. They have shifted their mindset on what value there is in Indonesia, and they're moving away from cattle, they're moving away from beef, and they're looking at mining, and they're looking at critical minerals. And the frustration that we all have in this room is that we have been trading live cattle and beef with Indonesia since Indonesia was Indonesia. But today the Australian government's shifted in a new direction, and they're saying, no, we want to sell something else. And you can't have that attitude to your trading markets. You need to be listening to your trading markets, and I'm very concerned that the current Australian government isn't listening to Indonesia.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Some really, it's really sort of the mind boggles on that one. Really, the dividend, the investment's not great, and it pays dividend for many, many years. I might just have I'm interested in a conversation now around, you mentioned biosecurity, Greg, a really important and topical theme, I guess, over the last 12 months. So there's probably a lot in this question where it's, I'm interested in a few of your sort of comments and ideas around regulatory compliance, the costs associated with that. We're seeing, massive increase in costs in a regulatory sense being imposed on industry. Is it a starving out of industry via stealth by just, choking it down with increased costs? Or is it really a move to build resilience in the industry and an attempt by government to try and make it sustainable going forward? So, that's the argument that they come back with. Or is there a balance? Is there somewhere in between? So as someone I might go to you, Ryan, as someone involved in a few parts of the supply chain. Yeah, how are you finding compliance with regulations and the really high bar that they're imposing on industry in a number of areas?
Thanks, Tracy. Probably the first thing that comes to mind, and it's probably the forefront of most people, is the lumpy skin or the skin lesions, fly bite criteria that's really been increased severely and is quite a high bar to maintain. And I will actually acknowledge there is quite a lot of agency that I deal with on a regular basis, and I will actually acknowledge the tremendous job that they have been doing. Now, we still get a few slip through the cracks, and we can't be perfect. That's not what we'll ever be able to achieve, I don't think. But ever since that rule come out, there was a lot of pushback straight away. But it's I think there's no one in particular here we can point the finger at, but we all can pull the line together. And as we've worked together, as from an exporter's perspective and as a buyer's perspective, we can give that information back to the agents and the producers. There's definitely been a good. They've definitely been helpful and really trying to make that work and get that right, because I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but we actually have to go through 2 veterinary inspections, so one from an AAV and then also the Aquis Vet, and then there's a final veterinary inspection on the ship before we're actually cleared to leave. So it is quite intense, and they are quite scrutinous, because if you give them something to look for, they're just going to go harder, and they'll look harder, and they'll look worse, and they'll look deeper in the pens, and instead of doing a visual inspection on a sample, they'll visually inspect everything. So I do applaud everyone for making the effort they have, because it hasn't been an easy change, and it was a snap decision. Well, not a snap decision, but it was enforced very quickly. So that's probably one of the biggest ones that I see. And if we can keep maintaining that and keep helping those relationships with the vets and keep easing that process, it'll definitely help it moving forward.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ryan. I think I might throw to you now, Greg. I'm really interested in your views on this. You've been around a long time. You've seen an enormous amount of regulatory and compliance change. Keen to get your views and just see whether you think we've got the balance right, or has it gone too far one way now?
Thanks, Tracy. Look, I just backtrack a little bit. Relationships have to be built to between Australia and Indonesia. If we just want to talk about Indonesia in this case, and obviously Indonesia is our main market. Godelva yesterday, Godelva's from Forum AWO, and she spoke yesterday at the international opening, and she used a figure yesterday of 50 million cattle have gone to Indonesia in the last 30 years, whether it be live or in box. 50 million, it's a fair few, twice our population. What are we doing to make it another 50 million in the next 20 years? I really don't think we're doing much, especially on the government side of things. And we all know, and that's what we're here for today, what happens if this trade stops. So to go back to you, Tracy, and talk about regulation, 2011 we had the bloody business, which we don't want to dwell on. It happened, it's done. But we had, what came into practice after that was SCAS. Now, I'm a great advocate of SCAS. I think SCAS is a great thing. But since SCAS was put into place in 2011, there has been nearly 10 million live cattle go through the system. 10 million. So how many mistakes have we made in that 10 million cattle? Now, not not too many, and I'm sure there's more than 10 million cattle. Let's say how many cattle have been trucked in Australia in that time as well. It's significant numbers. So we've got to build on those numbers. We've got to use those numbers to go back to the government. There's no way, we don't want to get away from SCAS in countries like Indonesia. They do a great thing, and that's our relationships with Forum AWO, which LiveCorp has kindly started to fund. They've got around about 200 members at the moment, and they're members, they're young people that are on the ground in Indonesia. They're in the abattoirs in Indonesia. They're there every day, they're there every night, and what are they doing? They're protecting Australia's market. So, and it's about SCAS. SCAS is great, but we're currently seeing an SCAS review, so we're currently seeing the government want to change the way we look at SCAS. They want to put more overreach into SCAS, which is another cost, and the cost is borne by the exporter, but at the end of the day, that cost will be borne by you, the producer. So if it costs us another $30 or $40 to do something in Indonesia, that will come back to you, the producer, and what will that mean? That will mean an extra 2 or 3 cents, 4 or 5 cents, whatever it may be. And it also, so it may mean that we just don't become competitive. So SCAS is great, overreach is creeping along, Will, you would have to say, wouldn't you? But I think we've got to remember those big numbers and our big reliance on the industry.
Just to support what Greg's saying, certainly support what Ryan's saying. One of the things that's really important or really interesting about working at a policy organisation is that you get to see how these decisions are made and the way in which they're made. And that's a critical thing for everyone to consider. There's processors here, there's feedlotters here, there's extremely large producers in the room currently looking at me, and it's making me quite nervous, but that's okay. Look, the challenge that we face as an industry is at the moment live export is on the thin end of the wedge. It's got the government's attention, it's the government's focus, that's where the regulation is. But the lessons that they're learning in live export are the lessons that they're going to be applying. And what we saw at the last election was a Labor government who committed to a national body for animal welfare. Now, these are the things that the Labor government currently is doing. I'm not having a shot at them, this is their policy. And these policy positions allow them to reach into the states and have at least some level of interference with the operation of the states. The challenges that we face today in live export are the challenges that are going to be inherited in other sections of the supply chain in the future. So going back to what Craig's talking about with SCAS, we've got an SCAS system that's been operating well. A tender goes out for an independent review. The people who are selected to do the independent review immediately approach it from the perspective of how do we strengthen the regulations. They don't go to Indonesia and say, well, let's see how this is operating, what's going well. They don't meet with Forum AWO and say, oh, you guys are now providing services and support to the supply chain. You've created an organic animal welfare arm in Indonesia that works to Australian standards. They don't do that. They say, how do we make it more complex? And going back to what we're talking about, what Ryan was mentioning about the way skin lesions were interpreted, the department was able to reject healthy cattle that completely fit the regulations and the expectation of what an animal needed to be exported because they changed their interpretation. They didn't issue any sort of notice. They didn't say this is what the new interpretation is. They just told their vets on the ground, we want you to change the way that you're allowing legal animals to be traded overseas, and thousands of head of livestock across Northern Australia were just ineligible to be exported. Under no notice, no regulatory change, no consultation. So this is the dangers that we have, because these powers are extraordinary, and these are the powers that can be used to damage anyone's business in this room, not just the live export industries.
Thanks very much, Will. I think you raised some really good points there, and certainly there's a lot coming at industry. Gary mentioned right at the very outset about Cattle Australia and the importance of becoming a member of that. I just want to take the time now to ask you all your thoughts on, as an industry, here we are on the panel represented by various segments of the supply chain, but really at the end of the day, we're all one big family, and we all rely on each other. Everybody plays a critical role. How well do you think we're going in? Well, you've certainly, the NTCA has been taking the lead on a lot of live export issues of late. we're seeing our national body really finding its feet and standing up now. But just interested in your views. Might perhaps start with you, Ryan. I don't mean it to be too a contentious question, but you know, as a young person, potentially interested in a future in representing your industry on issues. Have you got any thoughts on how we could be doing it better, or what we can be doing to get people involved and to step up and really find their voice?
I think to answer your question, there's always room for improvement, and if we take the approach of constant improvement, we can always be constantly evolving and maintaining that improvement level along a longevity, and that'll always help the long-term trade. As far as how can we involve a lot of people or more people, I think that really comes back to a broader reach and being more transparent with so many things we do, instead of trying to hide a lot of things, being a lot more open and honest with what is actually going on, and also just having a lot more involvement. Right from, Greg speaks about relations, he's a very big advocate for the relations, so right from the other end, right back through, all the way down the supply chain, right back through to our producers. And how that goes about, probably not a question for me, but I think that's one way we could do it.
I might go to you now, Will, and I'm just a heads up, I'm going to swing to the audience in a moment. The clock's ticking on us, but I'm keen to get some questions from the floor if there are any. Will, as an industry body that's been around a long time and enjoys a strong level of support, do you have any advice for those of us out there that might be interested in joining up or becoming a member of organisations, or you know, what is it that we could be doing more as a community to support those people that are at the table and really trying to advocate on behalf of industry and run a strong argument and work collaboratively with government and regulators?
Thank you, Tracy. Look, I think it's critically important. One of the things that we need to look back, when we look back in the last, say, 50 years of agricultural advocacy, I think there's a perception, or there can be a perception, that our influence in that time has diminished somewhat. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. There's photos in the National Farmers Federation office in Canberra of these enormous protests out the front of Old Parliament House with lots of people, thousands and thousands of farmers there. And today I don't know whether we would still be able to do that. The nature of our businesses have changed. But the biggest thing that's changed is the electoral maths. In the last 50 years, the population of the regions has significantly declined. And as that's declined, and the reliance that people have on agriculture and employment in agriculture has declined, what we're seeing increasingly is a political playing field that isn't favourable to us. So what's the most important thing that we can do is sign up to your state farming organisations, sign up to the advocacy organisations, and rock up to meetings and contribute. Because if you're not there, the electoral maths is not in our favour. It is very challenging for us in the future to continue to advocate to the really high level where we advocate to today, but it's going to become more and more important and not less important.
I always like to go one step further and say we're concentrating on a lot of things here in Australia, but what are we thinking about our market? And I will constantly go back to that. I don't know whether you were going to touch on this, Tracy, but I concentrate on Indonesia again alone, 280 million people, growing at 4%. So 10 million people a year adding to the population in Indonesia. 10 million a year. And they revised their consumption figures down to actually around about 1.8, 1.9 kilograms per person per year. So we eat 35, they eat 1.8. We don't need them to eat 35 kilos, or we're all, we can pack up and go home because we can send everything over there. But we want them to eat 2 kilograms. We do not really, as live exporters, we don't really focus enough on the market, on what's up there, what can be achieved, so that we can get more money for you, the producers. So think about that market first. We're going to get you more market because there's going to be more demand. But then we sit back here and we need you, as Will said, you've got to join those advocacy groups. You've got to join, you've got to be able to push to your local members, you've got to be able to push to Gary Edwards, you've got to be able to push to the other advocacy groups that want to maintain the market and maintain us, or you guys, as producers. And we've got a market, but if we don't have advocacy here, it will be a slow grind.
Probably, I'll just add one other thing, and Patrick Hutchinson's here somewhere from AMIC, or he's around. Have a chat to him about what he's seeing, because what Patrick's seeing now in the processing sector is what we've been seeing in live export and live export consultation for a long time. We go into meetings today with the Federal Department of Agriculture's live export branch, and Animals Australia and RSPCA are in the room, and they're contributing to decision making. What we're seeing increasingly is a broadening of a scope and a reinterpretation of who is a stakeholder of an industry. And this is changing everywhere. It will change for the feedlots, and it's changing for the processors already. So this is the significance of what we're doing. The people who are part of your state farming organisation are your voice. They are the people who are in the room. They are important to know, and they're important to talk to.
Yeah, it's a really important point, Will, and it's quite phenomenal that how influential the voice is of those that oppose what we do. I've just got 2 questions left now. So I'd really like to talk a little bit about the growing influence of Indian buffalo on the market. So perhaps a little bit about the Indonesian consumer first. I know when I was first kicking around Indonesia, there's a few thousand tonnes coming across the border of Indian buffalo, and I know at the time it was like, oh, it's not going to be a problem. You know, it's dark, it's tough, it's, you know, the consumer just won't go for it. And you know, it's all right, Australia, you don't need to worry about it. Well, now I can tell you that there are tens of thousands of tonnes of stuff coming into the market. We're also seeing the innovation, I think, in a number of ways in Indonesia, the growing levels of affluence, the Indonesian consumers changing their purchasing behaviour, their dietary habits. There is an enormous change afoot. Do you think we've kept up with that innovation? Are we still trying to send the same product into the same market and hoping that it will continue to grow? Or, you know, I'm interested in your view as to whether you think we're doing enough to keep up with our changing customer in Indonesia.
Thanks, Tracy. Again, back to relationships. I really do think we have let our relationship building drop in Indonesia. You know, we've got some old stalwarts here. We've got Diki Adiwaso, we've got Didik, we've got Nanang, we've got Richard Trivet. So we've got some old stalwarts here that went to Indonesia regularly 25 years ago. They pushed the flesh with everyone from business to government. And we knew what was going to happen with Indian buffalo meat, and the writing was on the ball with when Malaysia took it and Philippines took it. And I can still remember 15 years ago I said many times, look at these Malaysians, look at these Filipinos, they've already started to take it. 2011, the Indonesians, their protein supplies was stopped overnight, so what are they supposed to do? So they've gone and bought Indian buffalo meat. And as Tracy says, we've seen 150,000 tonnes plus come into Indonesia. It is controlled by government bodies up there, so it's probably it's the best way for it to actually be controlled. But as far as marketing our product, I think we do a reasonable job with marketing Australian live cattle. Obviously, we're marketing livestock. I can't talk about meat because meat is marketed well up there by MLA. But live cattle still is good, and we've seen the big thing about genetics in live cattle. We've seen when I first went up there with Tipperary in 1992, we were flat out getting 0.8 of a kilo on our weight going, 0.8, 0.9 a kilo. So we've seen genetics improve dramatically. I think Jeff Warren is here sometime. When we first got into partnership with CPC in 2000, we were getting about 1.2. Now it's not unknown to get 2 kilograms out of your cattle now. So genetically, if you talk about that as a marketing product, with genetics, we're selling much better cattle up there, and so the Indonesians are able to produce a much better product. As far as red meat going or warm meat going into the market, I don't think that's going to go away that quick. I think the affluent people still will go to the market and buy that 1 kilogram of warm meat. So I think we still have an opportunity for 500,000. I'd love to see more, but I think we still have to build those relationships, and especially with our customers up there. But Indian buffalo meat is a major concern, but I think we're probably on doing the right thing with live cattle. Will, what do you think?
Sorry, Will, I'm going to come to you right now. Your members pay a lot of money each year in levies to our industry levy body, and so just from your perspective, what are you hearing from your members? Are we doing enough in Indonesia? Have we let our relationship slide a little? Is there more work to be done? I know there's always more work that could be done, but from your perspective, you're back and forth to Indonesia, you have meetings at the Australian Embassy up there, you're very connected on the ground. Does our industry body have a presence up there, and are they doing enough?
I mean, I think the short answer and the honest answer is no, and I think by anyone's metric, it sounds like a criticism. MLA's got some wonderful staff in Indonesia. It's not necessarily a criticism of them, but has there been the focus and the attention that's necessary for a trade the size that it is with this market? No, I don't think anyone would say that. I don't think any of our members would say it. I don't think the exporters would say it either. The reality is there's been money in that sphere for quite a long time provided by the government. That's leveraged a lot of the investment that's gone into that space in terms of what MLA's been able to do. Now that the Red Meat Partnership, which had more than $100 million in it, has come to an end, we need that re-energised focus again. And we need to look at Southeast Asia more broadly. We need to focus on Indonesia. There are other markets out there. We have 1 billion people. What is it Luke used to say? 1 billion people to the north and 20 million people to the south. Or I'm going to get that wrong. But that's our market. That's exactly where our market is. And are we emphasising and are we taking advantage of the opportunities that are there? No, absolutely not. Can we do better? Absolutely. In the realistic and finite terms of what we have available in terms of levy funds every year, should we be doing better with it? Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Just a last question now, a last point really. What a fabulous event Beef Week has been. It's really apparent to me the amount of youth and young, smart and articulate people that are coming up through the industry. I think 20 years ago, you know, there was a bit of a joke that went around about bringing your kids home to the farm or back into the industry was, you know, a form of child abuse. And, you know, now we're really, it was a bit of a poor form joke, but it was a joke nonetheless. We're now seeing, you know, kids really seeing a bright future in our industry, and it's really marvellous to see. So I'd like to end on a softer note, and our people are really important to us. We've got a marvellous community. We've all got each other's backs when we need to. Ryan, why are you here? Why are you in this industry, and do you see it as a long-term prospect for you?
The reason I'm here, Tracy, is I actually love it. Like it's a fast-paced nature. It's just really good, and it's to travel overseas and see the product at the other end, the people that are involved. Like agriculture in general, I just love agriculture. Like if I was going to play in any space, it would be definitely in agriculture, and I can't see myself ever leaving. But live export, I just think fast-paced nature is what I love about it.
And Will, I'm interested in your perspective. You, like I said, you represent a lot of producers, a lot of young families. What are you seeing at your branch meetings and out on the ground in rural and regional NT? Are people enthusiastic about our future? Are they wanting to engage and participate? Is the future bright for our industry?
I think the answer I'm meant to give is absolutely, and the best part is the truth is it's absolutely. I mean, there's so many young people in the territory, and there's so many people trying to come through and push through and look for new ways to buy property. Obviously, value's gone through the roof, so you've got to find, how do I raise $100 million so I can buy a cattle station? And there are guys out there, there are young guys out there today trying to figure that out. And it's a really exciting space to be in. Like, the challenges are huge, roads are getting worse, government's not really necessarily a help, they're more often a hindrance. But the industry itself is doing really well and it's thriving. And I'm really glad. I mean, I get to come down to Queensland and you guys have got bitumen. It's amazing. I didn't know what it was when I first saw it. But you get to come down and see this is the potential for the Northern Territory. This is what the future looks like. And for us, we're a little bit behind, but we are very, very rapidly catching up.
And Greg, you've been around a long time. You've seen a lot of young folk come and go and enter and exit the industry. Are you seeing a greater, I mean, Wyland is a marvellous example of a, a successful group of young people that are very committed and passionate about the industry. I'm interested in your wise words on this. You've been around a long time, you've seen a lot. What's your thoughts on the future of our industry?
I think there's the future is what we have is an amazing synergy. We have northern cattle which can get on a boat within 4 days or 7 days. They can be in another country. They can be fed. That photo says it all. They can be fed byproducts. They can be fed corn. They can be housed extremely well. They can go through the most amazing welfare systems. We've got young people in both sides of the ditch, whether they be here in Australia, whether they be on the boat, whether they be in the country, looking after them, producing protein for these emerging markets that will not go away. So the synergy, an MLA chairman said to me 30 years ago, this is the best synergy in cattle production that we have. Northern cattle in Australia, Indonesian and Vietnam byproducts to produce red meat for these emerging markets.
Thanks, Greg, and I think that's a really important and nice, strong and positive note to end on. The fundamentals of the trade are still rock solid. It still makes sense, it still adds up, and we just need to make sure we don't take our eye off that ball as a community. Before we thank our panellists, is there anyone in the audience that has a question they would like to ask while we've got our gents here and ready, willing and able to take a question from the floor? Yep, one. Just introduce yourself.
Yeah, Mark Wilson. I was just wondering if the panel could comment on the potential impacts on the live export from the cotton industry and the NT with the cotton seed, and whether the better preparation of the cattle and also, Ryan, with the opening up of the market down here, like the potential for crossbred cattle and how that might affect the consumer, and when you're saying about Indian buffalo meat, it's a low grade meat, and traditionally they were getting live sports steers and heifers off farm. Now that they're getting prepared better and crossbred animals, whether the relationships in educating the consumer in Indonesia into a better quality animal, and just your comments on that.
Yeah, so there's a bit to that question, but I might just go straight to the cottonseed piece. It is an emerging and growing market opportunity, particularly in the territory. So I think their question was really around the importance of finishing cattle off perhaps a bit more before they head north. So I might go to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Tracy. I actually do agree with your comment. I do believe that there's huge potential coming forward. Or out. It's on again, righto. Yeah, so going back, I do believe that there's a huge opportunity for preparing and finishing cattle, getting them to a serviceable weight. Taking younger cattle through if the seasons aren't quite so supportive, leveraging off the industry that's currently being built in cotton, because cottonseed is such a great byproduct for feeding cattle. And to answer your question on the crossbreds, I do think I would be looking more to target Vietnam with a crossbred animal, as in Indonesia, and Greg can attest to this, but the Brahman animal over there is so well adapted to that conditions and the climate over there that's really what they want. And then it is my honest belief that we will see a premium for a straight line of either grey or red Brahmans coming in the future, and we're seeing that now. Like the last couple of months, where there's been a premium for a good line of grey Brahmans or straight Brahmans over. Probably more over than what you would see in Roma at the same weight on a crossbred animal. So I do believe that one of those things is if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's definitely the case for Indonesia. I don't know, Greg, if you would agree with that. I'm sure you've fed a multitude of number of animals over your time, but I think the crossbred thing, and that's honestly why we started the export yard at Raglan, because we identified that Central Queensland has such a large volume of good heavy cattle, and really target Vietnam with that. I think if you draw a 600 kilometre circle around Rocky, we've got like 6 million head of cattle in that area. So you know, you're right. We definitely have a very large number of good, heavy, crossbred Brahman cattle that are suitable. The heavy cattle are more suited for Vietnam than Indonesia. So I don't think the crossbreds will possibly creep into Indonesia as much, but as Vietnam increases in demand, I think those numbers will start increasing as well, and we'll see more and more go in there.
The only thing I'd add is just that the cotton gin just north of Catherine ginned its first bale officially yesterday. It's very exciting, and it looks like we're going to have a very busy season.
Thanks very much, Will. Well, I'd just like to take the time to thank you all for your attendance and for your attention and for joining us in the AAM tent. I'd like now for you to give our very experienced and engaging panellists a round of applause. Thank you. Okay, I'd just like to invite you now just to network and continue the conversation, and thanks very much for being our guest.